Coming up on this week's episode of TechSNAP, Anti-Sec has posted 1 million Apple UDIDs online that they claim to have gotten from the FBI. But what was the FBI doing with those in the first place? We'll discuss. Plus, major vulnerabilities have been found in some infrastructure switches, and we've got a big batch of audience questions and our answers. All that and a heck of a lot more in this week's episode of TechSNAP. Hi everyone, and welcome to TechSNAP, Jupiter Broadcasting's weekly systems network and administration podcast. This is episode 74, and we streamed it live on September 6th, 2012. This episode is brought to you by GoDaddy.com, and I'll tell you more about them as the show goes on. And the live stream is powered by ScaleEngine.com, which is awesome. My name is Chris, and joining us every single week is our host, the tech, the admin, and the teacher, Alan Jude. Hey there, Alan.
Hey, Chris, everybody. Thanks for watching.
Hey, man, welcome to episode 74, the 74 train. I like it. We just keep on moving. And we got a big show this week.
Yep.
Big show. 4 really meaty news stories, plus some great feedback, and also a packed roundup. And if we have time, and I don't know if we will, I'll give a little update on my file server project. And Alan has set up a file server this weekend, too. So we both were off on our own building file servers this weekend, and both were FreeBSD boxes, too. So
technically, I built 2.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, both were building personal file servers. Alan's all fancy. He's got to have multiple servers.
Well, no, the one was for work and one was
yeah, I
for
know.
home.
All right. Well, before we roll, now, of course, TechSNAP covers some of the greatest tech stories of the week, especially things that are security-focused and infrastructure-focused and system and networking and all those kinds of things. But if you haven't checked out our Unfilter show, this covers everything else that's going on in the world. And these last few weeks have been specifically crafted to be politics-free. I know that sounds crazy with the Republican and Democrat national conventions going on right now, and eventually we will talk about them in Unfilter, but right now we're keeping it focused on all of the other news because nobody else is talking about a lot of the other stuff that's going on because they're only reporting on the election stuff. So Unfilter is live Thursdays, which is also when TechSNAP is live, only we're live at 7:30 p.m., or 7 p.m., Thursday nights at jblive.tv. And then we release for download Friday mornings. And I think a lot of you out there who love the show would love Unfilter, so go check it out if you haven't given it a listen yet. All right, Alan, should we jump into our first story, which is a big pile of Oracle fail?
Yep.
All right, what happened?
So a couple hours after, if you remember, basically during TechSNAP last week, Oracle finally released an Java 7 Update 7 to fix the zero-day exploits, the pair of them that were being used to exploit people in the wild.
Yes,
So hours after that, the Polish security firm that had initially discovered the 29 different vulnerabilities in Java and reported them to Oracle in April, 2 of which were the ones that were being used and were fixed in this out-of-band patch, they noticed that with the patch that Oracle issued, Oracle had removed the get field and get method methods in Java that were causing these. They were the vector for these vulnerabilities. Mm-hmm. So is how they would use the vulnerability. Then they would use those methods to actually make an exploit and get out of the Java sandbox.
Right.
So basically, Oracle removed those vectors, those 2 methods from the Sun toolkit.
They just took them away, and that's how they fixed it.
and well, that stopped the exploits from working.
Sure.
And so the Polish security firm, Security Explorations, found that after the patch, none of their proof of concept code worked anymore.
Okay.
So they started looking around and figured out what Oracle had done by removing these 2 methods, and they basically discovered a new exploitation vector that would allow them to continue to exploit all of the vulnerabilities they had found before.
Okay.
So it basically it's not exactly the same exploit. It's the same vulnerability but done in a different way.
Right.
Since Oracle removed the way it was done before. So they've updated all their proof of concept code and sent it to Oracle again.
Wow.
Be like, how about you actually fix it instead of just, doing a tiny little patch.
Well, and so isn't part of the problem then that it's just like it's a small course adjustment for malware authors?
Well, the Polish firm says that the new vector is quite a bit more complicated.
Okay.
And
okay. Good.
That obviously the people that they're under the assumption that the people that made the 0-day before just happened to discover the same vulnerability as the Polish firm had found in April. Because the Java 0-day wasn't discovered until sometime in August.
Yeah.
By the people that were writing the malware.
Right.
So we probably have some time before they manage to find the same hole. Although knowing that there is another way to continue to exploit the same vulnerability gives them kind of a hint in what direction to go. But the security firm is purposely withholding all of the details in order to try to prevent people who write malware from being able to continue to exploit Java. But Adam Gaudek, the CEO of Security Explorations, says that if you don't need Java, you should uninstall it.
I was going to ask. I mean, do you just think we should just start making that recommendation on this show that just pull Java off? I mean, I don't want to. But the thing is, I don't want to be an overreactionary.
That's only if you don't need it, right? Basic security practice is if you don't need it, why have it at all? The issue is, I need it for some stuff. Like the IPMI systems for managing all my servers use Java because it's cross-platform.
What would be a good way to figure out if you require Java? I mean, some people might not know if their application needs Java or not.
Well, if you can disable it in the browser by going to like about add-ons or whatever.
And I think, that's definitely step number one.
Or basically, you can uninstall it, and then if you find something doesn't work, you have to reinstall it.
And Chrome, I think by default, and Firefox even now will disable.
Yes, Firefox disabled any older versions after the latest update.
So in the browser seems like step one, and that's because that's the easiest attack vector for people online.
Yes,
but
it's the most likely attack vector, although they could still do it other ways.
Yeah, like we might talk about in a later story. Okay, all right. Well, interesting. So
another thing that the CEO of Security Explorations commented on was that when they were trying all these things in Java 6 before, they were never successful. They never managed to get out of the sandbox in Java 6 except for one time when they actually piggybacked on an Apple QuickTime exploit.
That's right. In fact, we talked about last week that one of the temporary workarounds was going back to 6 if possible.
But the problem was 6 has some exploits that Oracle hasn't patched.
Right. So you just got.
But basically, he said that maybe the advancements they made in Java 7 were, to the detriment of the security. But yeah, basically, it's not actively being exploited in the wild, and so we likely will not see a patch for the modified version of these vulnerabilities until the October update cycle.
You and I were both pretty surprised.
We may not see that at all. They've known about these since April, and in the June update, they only fixed 2 of the 29 vulnerabilities.
I was just going to say, both you and I were very surprised last week when they actually did, even though no matter how bad these were, we were actually still surprised when they did an out-of-band patch for this one. So
it's very unusual for Oracle to do that. Although when there's 2 that are being actively exploited in the wild on a mass scale, they were kind of forced to.
Right, because heaven forbid you patch before it gets to that level.
Obviously, they seem to have only done a little kind of a workaround rather than a real patch. Right? They just disabled the methods that were being exploited because they weren't supposed to be able to be used. Those 2 methods were not meant to be used by an application anyway. They were only supposed to be able to be used inside the Sun toolkit as part of Java itself.
That's likely then a reason why they did an out-of-band patch, because they figured it was a low-impact change. So there was less risk to pushing it without further testing, perhaps. Maybe, I don't know, some sort of corporate reason like that.
Yeah. I'm not sure what's going on. There's a beta of a newer version of Java. Interestingly, like if you go under their preview thing, the next release that they're previewing is Java 7 Update 10. Right, so
7 is
last week the newest was 7U6. Now it's 7U7.
Right.
But their beta that's been out since before that is 7U10. I don't know if they just reserve version numbers like that and do up the it's kind of like a minor revision kind of thing. But
yeah, I am getting
using Linux. Then OpenJDK might be a more.
I'm trying not to be judgy, but I am just getting so anti-Oracle, and I wish I wasn't, because they are still playing a very important role, and they have such power still over very important aspects of sort of the whole open source online LAMP stack and all of that. So they're kind of a key player, even though
they shouldn't have been allowed to buy Sun and then everything be
what are you gonna do?
ZFS would still be alive, and MySQL wouldn't be all broken. And
right. But then, we wouldn't have had that comedic lawsuit against Android that Oracle attempted at the beginning of the year. So, I mean, there's that. Any other thoughts on this story?
Not really.
All right. Well, there you go. There's folks. There's your Oracle fail for the day. Hopefully this doesn't become a weekly trend on the show. Why don't we talk about something else that I hate to actually have to bring up? It seems like we talk about these kinds of vulnerabilities a little too often, too. And this one looks like it could affect switches, sort of something that strikes at the heart of the network.
A different kind of switch, or a different brand, basically.
Okay.
The other week we had talked about the RuggedCom ones that all had the same SSL certificate.
Right.
This one is GarrettCom. They make, again, hardened switches for specific...
Oh, good. I love it when it's one of the hardened ones.
Yes. So they basically they come with a hard-coded password for a default account that can't be changed or disabled.
Oh my gosh!
Now it appears that this account is only supposed to be able to be used over the serial interface.
Okay.
So only when you're physically at the device, there's a factory, in case you lose the root password or the old administrator quits or dies or whatever. So it kind of makes sense, but apparently there was a mistake in the software that allowed that to be used remotely as well. So a researcher at Cylance discovered the hidden account in April and warned the vendor and ISC CERT, which is the branch of the Department of Homeland Security that deals with the computer vulnerabilities. So the issue is present in GarrettCom's Magnum MNS 6K management software, versions 4.1.14 and 14.1.14 secure.
Secure versions.
Yes,
with extra security.
They offer more expensive secure versions of their firmware for their switches.
I love it. I love that they charge for it too. That's awesome.
Yes.
I love it. What a bunch of idiots.
So the issue was discovered in April. The vendor released an update in May, and then they just tell everybody about it now. The idea being giving the vulnerable installations time to update their software before they publicly disclose the vulnerability.
Okay. All right.
So basically, this is, they had picked this date back in May of when to tell people. Right? So give people time to install the patches before we disclose the vulnerability. The attack was mitigated somewhat by the fact that the attacker would need to have access to the switch with a regular account and then exploit the generic username and password to get to basically root privileges on the switch.
Huh.
So if you didn't have if you didn't already have an account somehow, then you wouldn't be able to exploit this. But basically, there's an account called Factory, which is intended only to be allowed to log in over a special local serial console. But there exists a bug in certain versions of the management software. Basically, Cylance managed to identify an unforeseen method whereby a user who logged in as guest, why is there a guest user on a switch? I don't know. Or operator could escalate the privileges to that of the factory account and have full administrative access.
The guest account could escalate to the factory account?
They could escalate to administrator by using the factory account. Yes.
Yeah.
So, a lot of these switches probably were never secured properly in the first place, and
Well, I mean, this is why, Alan, you spend the extra money for the hardened, secure switches. You got to make sure.
GarrettCom switches are marketed as hardened and used in traffic control systems, railroad communication systems, power plants, electrical substations, and U.S. military sites.
Of course they are.
Also, beyond the regular level 2 and level 3 switching capabilities, they also use serial to IP conversion to support SCADA systems.
Well, what would anybody ever want access to?
You want to be rooting the switch so that you can change a VLAN around and make a SCADA system that was purposely not linked to the internet, now linked to the internet.
Maybe that's exactly what you'd use a vulnerability like this for. I've been reading a book called Confront and Conceal, which talks about how they deployed some of the Olympic Games and Flame and Stuxnet. And the Iranians, one of the things we've always said on the show is, if you want something protected, disconnect it from the internet. The Iranians actually did that. They had what they called an air gap.
Well, Yeah, and basically what the U.S. did in that case was they had an agent inside who carried in a USB stick.
Yep. It's interesting. It's really interesting. And so, but when you have something like this, where when a network administrator lays it out and they say, well, I'm isolating these things into their own VLANs, and there's a different IP space over here. The two can't even talk to each other. Well, a hacker can work around that, especially if they get administrative level access to the switch and they can get on there and change things around. I mean, this is it's like every time we talk about these kinds of things, it's like the missing ingredient you need to do that kind of island hopping that we talk about all the time.
Yep.
Yeah. All right. So, any other thoughts on that story?
No, that's for that story.
All right. Well, then let's take a quick pause here and say thank you to the fine folks over at GoDaddy.com who have been, I don't know, Alan, how long have they been sponsoring us now? Like, going on
quite a while.
Yeah. I mean, I really appreciate GoDaddy's continued support of the Jupiter Broadcasting Network. And, one of the things that we talk about, and I forgot that we have a great code for this, is there is a virtual data center plan that they offer, and it actually is extremely awesome. It's called the GoDaddy Cloud Servers, and we actually have a promo code for you if you want to play around with this, and it's something that we've talked about a lot. And just use the code when you want to check out their new one of their new systems. Use the code TechSNAP25, and you'll save 25% when you're trying that out. However, if you're just doing some regular old purchasing and you have an order that kind of gets up there, say $40 or more, and you want to cut some money off that, use our code TechSNAP40. TechSNAP40 takes $10 off anything that's $40 or more. That's pretty nice. Gets that down a little bit. Takes $10 off. That's a really good savings. So you can use TechSNAP40 to save a little money. Or check out TechSNAP11 and get $1.99 hosting for 3 months. $1.99 hosting. Jeez, I mean, think about that. Think about how freaking crazy that is. You can get hosting on a web server for $1.99 for 3 months when you use the code TechSNAP11. So thank you to GoDaddy.com for their longtime support of the TechSNAP program, and also just awesome supporters of the Jupiter Broadcasting Network. All right, sir. Well, so that's my plug for GoDaddy, and thank you to everyone who supports GoDaddy and thusly supports the TechSNAP program. Now, Alan, this next story we have on here was one of the most highly voted stories on the TechSNAP subreddit, and the subreddit. Yep. Kicking butt this week over at links.techsnap.tv. Thank you, you guys. Voting on stories, commenting on stuff, tons of submissions. Really, really awesome to see that. And this was one of the ones I think that got most people to smile. Mitt Romney's taxes have been hacked and put up for ransom for Bitcoins.
Apparently, yeah.
Okay, tell me what's going on here. You think this is legit?
Yeah. So hackers claim to have stolen Mitt Romney's tax returns from the financial services firm that he uses.
Yeah.
So a group claims that they basically broke into the offices of PricewaterhouseCoopers in Tennessee. Basically got someone on the third floor to let them in, and then they went down some stairs and broke into their offices on the second floor. They basically say they accessed a network file server and managed to copy Romney's tax returns for the years before 2010. Apparently, the later years hadn't yet been completely digitized, so they weren't in an easily to steal format.
Huh. You think this? I mean, my spider sense told me the story was a little BS, especially when they, some of the funding they went for. What do you think? Well, I heard like one of their funding options was they were going to set up 2 Bitcoin addresses. One,
yeah, they have that.
Yeah. So, I mean, I won't step on it. I know you're probably going to get to that, but I mean, all of this kind of was setting off alarms. But you're kind of sounding like maybe you thinking it's legit.
They, as I'm getting to here, they have quite a bit of detail about how they managed to steal them. Like they go into quite a bit of detail about how they, broke into the office, accessed a network file server, copied the taxes for Mitt Romney and his wife, and they couldn't get the newer years because they hadn't been put on the file server yet. They were probably still paper form rather than haven't been scanned and stored on a file server yet. They also apparently got a scan of his signature from the tax forms.
Huh, that's interesting.
So they can, be like, look, we have his signature. Where did we get that? And they say they sent copies of the documents they stole to the Democratic and GOP offices and to the offices of PricewaterhouseCoopers, the people they stole it from. So obviously PricewaterhouseCoopers could say that, we never received such, or,
So they've turned them over to the Democratic Party?
Yes. And the GOP, and apparently they've also sent them to the media, although the copies to the media are encrypted. It's not clear whether the copies to the Democratic Party are encrypted or not.
No
I
way.
imagine so. Otherwise, they wouldn't get the ransom, right? So they send encrypted copies out to a bunch of different places, and they're saying if they get paid $1 million worth of Bitcoins to the first address, they'll destroy the encryption key and no one will be able to see the tax records. If they don't get the money by September 28th, or if $1 million is sent to the second address instead by someone else who does want this information to come out, then they will release the key publicly and everybody will be able to decrypt the file.
Why not just do it if you really have the tax records?
Because why not get $1 million?
Yeah.
I don't know. It definitely seems like somebody just wants to get $1 million or to see if they can get $1 million.
And of course, it's got Bitcoin involved with it too, which kind of makes it interesting.
How else are you going to not get caught? It's your best hope of not getting caught.
Man, they're going to put some heat on Bitcoin if this is real. They really are going
to. First of all, it doesn't seem correct to call these people hackers necessarily because they physically broke into it and stole the data that way rather than accessing it remotely. It seems like they just walked up to the file server and copied the files onto some USB sticks. They didn't actually have to break into the file server.
Yeah.
The attackers do seem to have thought ahead, including in the copies of the documents they sent to like PricewaterhouseCoopers. They included a bunch of random sentences. And then in their communications where they're saying, you have to send this $1 million to this Bitcoin address, at the bottom of that statement includes one of the random sentences to prove that they're the real attackers, not just someone else saying, oh, give me $1 million and I won't release the key that I don't actually have.
Oh, right. Yeah. Copycats that would just make the same claims.
Right. So they have a bunch of these basically authentication strings that they sent to the financial firm, which is in this case acting on behalf of the Romneys, to prove their identity to them. So these guys have thought ahead of this or have done this before or something.
These guys are going to have the Secret Service on their ass. And
yes, because Mitt Romney is a candidate for president, the Secret Service is investigating this.
I think that's the kind of heat nobody wants. And then to bring Bitcoin into that spotlight too. Jeez.
Although really the biggest spotlight for me is on PricewaterhouseCoopers. Some people manage to just walk into their offices and walk out with somebody's tax returns.
That's but it's never physical access as a contractor. I can't count how many times I'm always surprised that I just walk into a business and look like I'm supposed to be there and maybe have a nice laptop and they just kind of assume I'm the computer guy. And
in Canada we have this law called the Personal Information Protection and Electronic Documents Act, or PIPEDA, and it basically mandates that when companies are storing your personal data and not even as sensitive as tax returns, they have to be in a locked cabinet in a locked room that only the people that absolutely need access to have access to that locked room, right? Not just anybody at the company should have access to that room. It should be, strictly controlled. And that, these file servers need to employ various types of encryption and so on. And basically details what kind of safeguards should be taken to make sure that somebody can't just walk in, pretend like they're supposed to be there and walk out with tax records. In this case, they seem to have done it after hours, but it definitely seems like there was no physical security on these file servers.
Yeah, for sure. And when you get local access, even a lot of really good security systems fall down. So it's understandable if you can get there. There's a lot of things that'll be defeated by that. I guess maybe by next week or something we'll actually have the results, won't we?
Well, the deadline is 3 weeks away.
Oh, 3 weeks. Oh, okay.
Yeah, September 28th.
Bummer. I want to know now.
Basically, I imagine, at some point somebody will have to make a statement. Basically, PricewaterhouseCoopers is going to have to admit whether or not somebody broke in and stole the tax records. If they didn't, the story's over. If they did, then...
Well, and if they release them and they're extremely boring, it's going to be very anticlimactic.
Yes.
Now, if there's something good in there, that'll be great. That's going to be a great story. All right. Well, any other thoughts on that one?
No, that's about it. There's some links to the original paste bins and some more detail about how they got in and what they want and so on.
Check the show notes, folks, which you can find over at jupiterbroadcasting.com. Look for TechSNAP 74. When you go to our show page, you'll see the video show up. You scroll down for the download links, and there's the RSS links, and you scroll down a little bit further. Boom. Show notes for you, folks. Yep. All right. Why don't we talk about a story that I think probably made everybody in the audience that has an iOS device maybe take a little pause this week. This sounds like a pretty major leak. Alan, what happened? What's going on?
So Antisec, which is a spin-off of the Anonymous movement, released an encrypted file that contained 1 million iOS unique device IDs and some other data, although some of the data had been sanitized to protect people's privacy.
Oh, how nice.
They claim to have stolen this file off an FBI agent's laptop.
Which the FBI denies, right?
Which raises the bigger question, why does the FBI have this file? So Antisec claims that the original file that they stole contains more than 12 million records. They just released the first million as a taste or whatever.
Yeah.
The files apparently include various levels of detail. Basically, some people, they have more detail than others. Some, they barely have any information. But apparently it includes the unique device ID of the device, the push notification token, which is for sending data to that, the device's name, right, because people can name their devices, username for the Apple username or whatever, the person's cell phone number, address, zip code, what type of device it is, and a bunch of other data.
Isn't that great?
So some people have this level of detail, some people don't. So basically, the attackers claim that they remotely accessed Supervisory Special Agent Christopher Stangel's Dell Vostro laptop in March of 2012 using the atomic array reference Java vulnerability that was released at that time.
Yeah.
And they say during a shell session, some files were downloaded from the desktop folder of the notebook, one of which was one called NCFTA iOS devices intel.csv.
Huh.
Now, the NCTFA is the National Cyber Forensic and Training Alliance.
Yeah, okay.
Which is, we had talked about a little bit before, especially in regards to CISPA, which was the law that was going to allow private companies to share data with the FBI.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the NCFTA is basically a private group set up by a former FBI agent to facilitate information sharing between private companies and the FBI. So companies can share information with the nonprofit NCFTA that they would be wary of sharing or prohibited from sharing directly with the FBI. So companies can donate the information to the nonprofit who will then share it with the FBI.
So a middleman kind of thing.
So the companies can't get sued for sharing the data with the FBI.
So why did we need CISPA if this is already going on?
That's one of the links in the show notes is about how we didn't need CISPA.
They just wanted to legalize what they're already doing.
Basically.
Take out the middleman.
Instead of using a loophole, just make it direct.
Well, and there's some sense to that, right? Because there's probably somebody in the middle now profiting in some regard, in some way. I'm sure they can figure out a way to make money off this whole thing.
Yeah, and also I imagine it had to do with being easier to convince companies to deal directly with the FBI instead of the training alliance. SSA Stanger is a member of the FBI's Regional Cyber Action Team and also the New York FBI Office Evidence Response Team, which is about, computers as well. So the FBI denies the claim, saying, quote, "The FBI is aware of published reports alleging that an FBI laptop was compromised and private data regarding Apple UDIDs was exposed. At this time, there is no evidence indicating that an FBI laptop was compromised or that the FBI either sought or obtained that data."
Well, but, I mean, Antisec got it somehow.
Right. And basically, the FBI is saying that there's no evidence that their laptop was hacked and no evidence that they ever wanted or had that file. They're not saying they didn't have that file. They're saying there's no evidence that they had that file.
Right. It kind of sounds like you can't prove we did.
They're choosing their words very carefully.
Yeah.
Basically, they're saying there's no proof of anything yet.
That's a weird response. And it's also actually not very common for the FBI to issue a response like this early into a process. That was noted.
It's mostly probably to do with the number of reporters asking them questions.
I'm sure they're getting some
press release.
Yeah.
So the kind of general consensus so far seems to be that this data is coming from app developers, and they're sharing it with the NCFTA because when you buy an app, sometimes your real name will go to the app developer as part of the credit card payment and so on. And so if a bunch of these app developers were working with the FBI could construct this database so that when they see a certain UID, they could tie it to a certain person's identity. So there's a website set up called Identifying the Trader, which allows you to go put in your device UDID and what apps you usually use and what apps you definitely do not use. And by collecting that from a lot of people, they hope to be able to narrow down which apps are actually possibly sharing their data with the FBI.
Oh, good. Yeah. Gosh, how creepy.
Yes.
And in the subreddit, there's an article link that kind of explains some of the privacy implications and maybe kind of takes a stab at what we might see people now be able to pull off now that they're going to have some of this information too, which some of the possibilities aren't very nice.
Yeah,
very disappointing.
Obviously, there's levels of phishing and stuff that could be taken with it. It comes down to how much of this data Anonymous ends up releasing. If they release the full data, which has people's names and addresses and phone numbers and stuff, then it could get all kinds of crazy.
Yeah. It is interesting that they're not, right? I mean, that is an interesting...
Well, but one of the people that has access to it could sell it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, somebody. Yeah, they're not always the most cohesive group. They're not always in unanimous agreement about things.
And
yeah. Any other thoughts on that one?
Free money, right? There's a link to the original pastebin, which is quite long.
Yes.
The file's posted in a bunch of different places, but it's encrypted. You have to download it, make sure it hasn't been modified, decrypt it, make sure it hasn't been modified again, and then you have the file.
I just tried loading it, and it almost nuked my browser. It's so long. It's
a million lines. That's like 90 megabytes of data. You don't open that in Notepad.
I was like, abort, no. All right, Alan. Well, wow. Let us know, folks, if you go out there.
It'll be interesting to see what comes of that.
Yeah, I want to know if people plug in their stuff and if they...
Well, the other thing is, there's been talk for quite a while about the security implications of these UDIDs, right? They're not really secret, and they're used all over the place, and, it's basically a fingerprint that people can use to follow the same device around the internet.
It seems like Apple
Basically, it seems like the same idea as, remember, the Intel CPU IDs?
Yeah.
That was all going to be a big thing in, 10 plus years ago.
And I guess the use of the ID is deprecated in iOS 6 and then supposed to be completely removed later on. But they were slowly doing this move away from it because Apple must have known something like this could happen. So they were kind of pushing developers in that direction, but they weren't doing a hard cut. And it's too little too late. It's already out there. All right, sir. Well, I believe with all of the news done, that means it's time for the TechSNAP feedback. Thanks for sending your feedback to TechSNAP at jupiterbroadcasting.com or submitting your link or question to the TechSNAP subreddit at links.techsnap.tv or using the contact form at the top of jupiterbroadcasting.com. Now, I had myself a hardware extravaganza failure before the show started, so I only got to a couple of the emails. In fact, I didn't even get to emails. I only made it to the subreddit. So I guess this might be one way to say if you really want to make sure it gets into the show, your subreddit's the best way to get a hold of us because I'm always going there before a show starts. I didn't get a chance to get to the email, but we still got a good batch of questions, Alan. So are you ready for the first one, sir? All right. Here it comes. This one comes from Bizarmat. Bizarmat says, I have a question for TechSNAP regarding Comcast Transparent DNS Proxy. He says, after a convoluted series of events and rampant head scratching, I've determined that my ISP transparently redirects my DNS traffic to their own server. And even though I've recently learned that this insidious was the result of faulty firmware on the modem they had recently replaced, it gives me yet another reason to consider using a VPN service. So my question is it possible to configure pfSense to act as an open VPN SSL client and tunnel and route all of my LAN to the WAN through a service like Watopia or TorGuard, something like that? I've been using Untangle for about 3 years now, but it doesn't seem to support this kind of thing out of the box, although I was able to redirect port 53 to OpenVPN's alternate port service. Love the show. Been watching you guys for a year or so now. Has it really been that long? P.S. I always have my affiliate extension on when I'm buying stuff. Good man. Especially at work. And then he asked, does Tiger Direct or Zones.com have affiliate programs? Might be missing out. I don't know. We'll have to look into that.
Yep.
What do you think, Alan? Do you think...
But yes, pfSense can do that. We've actually done an install like that for a client. They only had one server for their Windows domain. And So basically, it was their web server and their domain controller.
Okay.
Which is a bad idea. Don't do that.
That's a horrible idea.
But basically, we pulled their server out of their office and put it in our rack. And then the OpenVPN or the pfSense box at their office would VPN into the Windows server so that the local machines could log on to the domain controller. But the web server wouldn't have to run off their low-grade DSL.
Brilliant. I've done similar solutions where you've had two offices that were separated. This is,
and this is why the feature is built into pfSense. Is right.
Exactly.
The idea is that the whole point behind the original design of a VPN was to create a virtual private network. So basically, to extend your LAN between your two offices over the internet and have it still be secure.
There you go. I mean, this is exactly.
So yes, this would allow you to basically tunnel out beyond Comcast to somewhere where you could then reach real DNS servers. It seems kind of weird that the modem even has the ability to inspect your packets and rewrite all your DNS queries to go to.
Maybe it's like if it's on 53, redirect to here or something. Maybe they do something.
Yeah, really... it's a weird thing to do. But
yeah, it is weird. I know.
Like when I only saw the title of the question without having actually read the question, I figured they were just asking, if I just make pfSense my DNS server,
right,
and have it do real queries to like the root. It's like, well, that would work, but if Comcast is
redirecting
intercepting the packets after, that would cause the same problem.
You remember how
we question of can you use it as a VPN client so that you connect to the VPN once instead of once per computer? Yes.
Right. You remember how we talked a long time ago that Google figured out that users of the Google DNS service weren't getting the advantages of DNS geo-caching or bouncing, where like Alchemy services were sort of getting abused at one location if you were using Google DNS or
because basically
DNS.
Because the geo DNS systems usually base it on basically when they get a query from a DNS server, they can only base it on the location of that DNS server, not the location of the actual user. The problem with Anycast is basically all of Google's IPs are registered so they look like they belong to Google's head office in California, even when that IP happens to be in Amsterdam, the Netherlands, in Europe.
Right.
And so, because all the traffic was going to the California nodes for things like iTunes.
Which was just making it awful for some people.
So Google and some other providers and some CDNs created this thing called afasterinternet.com or .net, which is this basically an extension to DNS that allows you so Google servers will pass part of your IP address, the first parts, not individual client addresses, but the subnet, to the servers when they request the DNS, so that the server can make the decision based on the client's IP rather than the DNS server's IP.
I just wonder if maybe Comcast is looking at this from a customer experience standpoint, and they're saying, well, if the user sets their DNS to this, and then they go to do iTunes downloads or they go to do Netflix streaming, they're complaining Comcast is slow. They're saying their internet connection's slow, when it's their damn DNS. So we'll just take that DNS packet and send it to our own servers.
The people that are specifically choosing a DNS server instead of using automatic are most likely doing it because of some problem with the Comcast DNS server.
Right, and they're usually savvy enough. I know I was just trying to play devil's advocate.
Yeah, but assuming that you know better than me is always wrong.
That's very true. And if you're a user who's using Google DNS or OpenDNS, you likely are aware of what's going on there.
Yes.
All right, should we cover the next question submitted to the subreddit? And I like this one. This one came from Jimmy Jazz, and he says, how do you guys choose your networking gear? I'm currently working towards getting my CCNA and already studying my CCNA security and CCNP material. I want to just know how you choose what networking equipment to use and when. For example, an HP ProCurve rack switch and a Cisco 2950 both support the same features. Cisco's proprietary stack aside. The price difference is considerable, however. What do you look at when selecting equipment? Support contracts, price, aesthetics, fanboyism? Alan?
It can have a number of different things. Part of it depends on who am I buying it for. Like if I'm making a recommendation for our government clients, then it'll be different than if I'm making a recommendation for myself, and so on.
I would never walk into a client's office that had all Cisco gear and say, yeah, let's get you an HP switch. Right? I mean,
the HP switches are nice. I've seen them deployed. Like actually, the college where I worked was all a lot of HP switches, even though most of the other stuff was Cisco.
Oh, good. I was going to fight if you didn't think so. I'm extremely impressed with the HP switches, and I've used them in extremely complicated production environments with massive throughput. And I have just like old HP switches that still are just awesome devices that just run nonstop. And a lot of them come with lifetime warranties, which you can't beat that.
Right. And, if you need things like support contracts or, then... And also it can come down to if this is going to be installed somewhere where it's going to be there for a very long time, the availability of spare parts, right? If you're choosing a name like Cisco or HP, the kind of modular power supply that those take, you'll still be able to get that 5 years from now.
Right.
But if you use some off-brand that is necessarily going to, there's not going to be a stock of the spare parts for it necessarily.
You're never going to go wrong in terms of with Cisco because that place will always be able to find somebody who's worked on a Cisco before and knows how to manage them. And also, like in some places, like financial institutions, auditors come in and they have a certain benchmark they hold you to, and their checklist sometimes expects certain equipment to be on that checklist or certain operating system versions to be on that checklist. And if you don't have something they expect, they might ding you for that. So there are scenarios, but if it's just for me or if I'm building my own data center, I almost always go ProCurve stuff.
Our stuff is all Netgear.
And what do you think?
Mostly to do with cost.
I was wondering, and have you found any...
We're not interested in any type of support contract. We don't need that. And also, we're not dealing with like hundreds of switches here. We're dealing with like 4.
Do you ever find like you need to log into your remote power switch and power cycle them or anything like that?
No, never had any trouble with the switches other than one time when we did reboot it and it didn't remember its configuration, but that was my fault, not the switch's fault.
Oh.
That can't never be really had any, never had any trouble with the Netgear switches we've had. We have like a layer 2 one with advanced features, a layer 3 one, a couple different ones.
I have 2 in production here in my studio network because I didn't want to pay. The main backbone of the studio network is on an HP ProCurve, and it's awesome, and I get incredible throughput. But then there's a lot of like there's a render farm that's on a Netgear switch, and there's editing machines that are on a Netgear switch, and they've been great. And I'm talking 106 megabyte transfer rates and things like that.
Yeah. We max out the gigabit network cards in our servers all the time on the Netgear switches without any trouble. Basically, we look at specifications, how many packets per second can it do, how much memory does it have, and, mean time between failures and stuff like that. But really, a lot of times it was coming down to the features for the price. We wanted a switch that would have a redundant power supply, but cost less than $10,000.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, there's definitely scenarios where Cisco goes in over something else. He's going.
And, sometimes it came down to like, if we bought the switch today and we wanted to buy the kind of modules to do fiber 5 years from now on that switch, to do like 10 gigabit fiber, it may be hard to find those because we're using a Netgear instead of a Cisco. But the amount of money we save means we could probably just buy a new Netgear or a new Cisco later on.
Yeah, totally. All right, so ready for the next one?
Yep.
I stillove this one, and it's in a response to Sean's email, which we read last week, where he's dealing with some pretty stringent... Yeah. Yep. So Windy Power writes in, and check this one out. He says, Sean's email got me going, and I happen to live in Canada, where all ISPs, at least in his area, put a monthly cap on incoming and outgoing bandwidth. In my case, he was paying the most expensive plan available, which gave him 120 gigabytes up and down combined together. Oh my gosh, I think I'd go through that in an afternoon. Mm-hmm. However, he just happened to have a home server and a Linode VPS server. Not a GoDaddy server. So what about that TechSNAP code? And I thought I'd make good use of both of them. Now this is I like this. So he installed Polypo on it. I'm not familiar with that on his home server, listening on port 1234. It's a lightweight, kind of like a Squig caching proxy. And then he also installed Polypo on his VPS server, listening on port 1234. He's established a persistent SSH tunnel from his home server to his VPS box, and with compression set to maximum level, with port forwarding for the home server's local interface 5678 to the VPS's localhost 1234. So he's connecting to the localhost's proxy server. And then he said he set up his home server's Polypo to tunnel all requests through the parent HTTP proxy, and pointed that to localhost 5678. So by going to localhost 5678, which tunnels to 1234 on his VPS, he's essentially sending his HTTP traffic to his VPS server to be proxied. Overall, this gave him from his home server through a compressed SSH tunnel to his VPS and then out to the internet. This way he gets two levels of caching because he's using the proxy on both ends and he's using SSH compression. He says, as an added bonus, his VPS is in the United States, so he gets access to all the US-only sites transparently. And no, it's not slow at all. The connection between my home server and my VPS is pretty fast and usually has only 20 milliseconds of latency. Sometimes you even get better download speeds.
That could be an issue.
Yeah, he says sometimes you even get better download speeds.
Latency can be a big issue if the server is not very close to you. Like I was having trouble for a while with my connection to Tor, the game server, and the Old Republic, Star Wars, not Tor, the proxy thing. And my ISP was giving me a very bad route, so I set up a VPN to my servers, which are, like as I said, less than 10 milliseconds from my house, and I ended up actually having 15 milliseconds less ping by adding a 10 millisecond VPN.
Of course, the other benefit he has is since everything's going through SSH, all his traffic's encrypted, between at his home connection.
What he's actually after is that it's getting compressed first.
Yeah.
And that can reduce, although it basically depends what you end up using your 120 gigabytes on. Now, with a cap that small, you're starting to get into the point where, compressing stuff although he's probably wasting a lot of CPU time. Most content that comes from a website over HTTP is compressed as it is.
Right, like a JPEG.
Although compressing the whole thing, well, yes, but like even the text will be gzipped, right?
Yeah, a lot of times, yeah, it's true. He also says,
and things like YouTube videos aren't going to compress at all. So
right. For maybe a less extreme and much easier to use method, you might consider using Opera's Turbo/mobile mode, which proxies everything through Opera servers where their image quality gets lowered and the markup converted to a binary markup language, which is much smaller than HTML. It saves a ton of bandwidth, but you have to use Opera. Be comfortable with having everything tunneled through their servers, and it's for HTTP only.
Right.
So that's another possibility to look at, is that...
But yeah, you can do a couple of things like that to try to reduce your bandwidth usage. And obviously the caching will help a bit, especially if you have a lot of people accessing the same stuff. But
good stuff. Now, Alan, those were the only emails I got a chance to run through this week, but we should be able to get to more. And remember, we're also looking for your submissions when we have to pre-tape episode 80, because Alan's going to be at Euro BSD Can, right? I got it right this time, right?
It's Con, not Can. It's not Canada, so there's no Can.
Dang it! One of these days, I'll get it right. Yep. So we're asking what you wish new hires knew, and of course, you can email that to techsnap@jupiterbroadcasting.com, or you can submit in our subreddit where Glitter Gulch started a thread, and these are things you wish the newbies coming into your field knew a little bit more about, or transversely, if you're a newbie and want old-time rookies or old-time seniors to be maybe a little more understanding, you can toss a suggestion there. Then please also, if you're in there, go in there and vote the ones up you like, because we'll be using those to weigh which ones we should put in the show. Also, another thing you can do just for fun is you can take a guess at the headlines that will be out the week that we pre-tape. What big story are we going to miss? You can go fill that out in the thread, and maybe we'll read out a few of our favorites during episode 80. One last thing, too, just to remind everybody about, is if you're over at jupiterbroadcasting.com, you can support the continued production of all of our shows by using our affiliates at the bottom of Jupiter Broadcasting for Amazon or Newegg or ThinkGeek or Code School if you want to learn by doing. And you can also grab our browser extensions. We'll automatically tag our affiliates for you, like one of our emailers did, and also considered maybe contributing directly either through the Amazon payment or the PayPal payment. And that way you're directly supporting the continued independent production of the content you love. All right, Alan, I think that's all the email we got for this week, which means it's time for the TechSNAP Roundup. Welcome to the TechSNAP Roundup. Yeah, that's what that crazy music means. Now, the Roundup are stories that didn't quite make it to the top of the show, but we still want to talk about, maybe give you a few links to follow up on your own after the show. And they're almost always powered by our subreddit over at links.techsnap.tv. Alan, are you ready for the first story from the Roundup this week?
Yep.
Give a little BSD love, everybody. Ghost BSD 3.0 Beta 1, LXDE, and GNOME editions are ready for testing. Ghost BSD sits on top of FreeBSD 9, which I think maybe some folks in our audience have an interest in. It's got a nice clean look.
Beta 1 and 3.0 Beta 1 and Release Candidate 1 are actually based on FreeBSD 9.1.
9.1, yes.
To become in a couple of weeks.
Also, it's going to be using, the GNOME version will be using GNOME 2, which I thought was interesting. Yep. Really interesting.
Because GNOME 3 doesn't work on BSD because they went to a Linux-only hardware interface.
Right. Also, of course, since it's BSD, you're going to get ZFS support, though they haven't fully tested it with their config, but I'm sure it works just fine. Anyways, pretty neat. Go check that out, folks.
But basically, yeah, it's providing you FreeBSD with your, basically providing the desktop system with it, right?
Yeah.
A base install of FreeBSD doesn't come with any packages.
Right.
So the base is basically a distribution that provides a base set of packages to provide you with an LXDE or GNOME desktop, as opposed to just having the command line until you manually install the desktop.
Looks like another great alternative to something like PCBSD.
Yep.
All right. Well, now in the roundup, we have a story from Adobe. This one looks pretty crazy. Adobe restores Android Flash plugin in the UK Google Play Store. I didn't see this one coming. Tell me about this.
Yeah. So because of pressure from some of their partners, which included the BBC, Adobe has re-released Flash for Android to support 4.x and 4.1. The idea being, the purpose being that, among other things, the BBC iPlayer uses Flash to deliver to Android. And so the BBC has an interest in keeping Flash on Android.
That's not a good long-term strategy for the BBC, though.
No, but basically the Android devices like 2.x and so on aren't still have enough market share that they can't switch everything over to HLS streaming.
Right, because they don't have support for it.
Even with HLS streaming, as we've found for our stream, Flash still works the best. There isn't a better streaming technology yet.
Yes, we've have some personal experience with that.
Yeah.
All right, now this next one's pretty wild because you think it's something designed to make you secure. Turns out, when you think about it, not too surprisingly, it's actually
a lot of them are
pretty
gimmicky. Yes.
Yeah, it's a problem. That's exactly what it is, Alan. It's a gimmick. So a widely used fingerprint reader exposes Windows passwords in just seconds. Here's the punchline: after analyzing a number of laptops equipped with this UPEC fingerprint reader, the UPEC Protector Suite, which ships with the fingerprint reader as part of the management software, stores your Windows account passwords in registry in practically plain text. It's just barely scrambled, not even encrypted, right into the registry. So if you can read the registry and you can get into there, you can get the passwords.
And dumping the registry by booting the machine off a live CD is trivial.
Yep. Because you're getting
the general idea here would be that you would encrypt it with a key and the key would be like the fingerprint or something. Well, the fingerprint's hard to do that with because the fingerprint isn't going to be exactly the same every time.
True.
But yeah, basically the problem with these password vaults is that they're meant to make you feel cool, not to protect you.
Yeah, they're just too gimmicky at this point.
Yep.
All right, now, Alan, this next story in the roundup comes from Slash.Firefox and Opera allowing phishing by data URI claims. New paper.
Yeah, so there's a new paper out that basically says because of data URIs, which is basically, when you normally in HTML, you'd have like image source equals and then the URL to a picture.
Yeah.
Well, you can put, instead of the protocol HTTP, you can set the protocol to data and then provide basically a base64 encoded file.
Sure, okay.
So basically a string that is the binary of the file, a text representation of the binary of the file. Especially if you're using a lot of really small images, like if your image is just a square of like blue and you want to just repeat it a bunch of times, instead of making it load a separate file, you can just load this little data element. So basically it allows you to build images inline into the HTML. However, basically they're saying that because those don't have URLs, you can end up doing some kind of phishing with it by basically hiding where the pictures are actually coming from.
Gotcha.
And some stuff like that. I didn't have time to read the paper, but it looks fairly interesting and might be a good read.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, this next one's great, and it's a topic I think we've actually touched on the show quite a while ago.
Times, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, we talked about it once or twice.
Especially when we get into like some different data center solutions that can be pretty creative.
Yes, I think there was one in Sweden or something where it was inside the side of a mountain.
That sounds right.
Servers were dunked in oil.
Yeah, so Intel, who's kind of like historically conservative when it comes to a lot of their different cooling solutions, Intel has for the last year been testing cooling by immersing servers in oil, and they've come back and said, you know what? It works really well. Not only does it actually just work very efficiently for cooling, but it can use a lot less power. And they've posted a video of some of their demo systems on YouTube in 3D, by the way. Yep. which is funny.
An interesting thing here means that it's likely that this won't void your warranty where it might have before.
Yeah.
It wasn't officially supported before, and now maybe it will become officially supported. I'm not that worried about it. My servers aren't having any trouble staying cool.
No, if you got good air cooling, but
basically the data center I'm at takes care of that. But yeah, there's a lot of old ones that I've seen have a lot of trouble with, just especially the higher density servers now. Especially like, Supermicro sells these systems where you can get like a 3U box that has 9 i3s in it. That's a lot more density than a lot of these data centers were designed for.
Yeah, here's an interesting shot of some units that are designed for data center deployment, and they're just big dunk tanks. And you build basically
Linux King from the chat room asked what kind of oil it is. It's usually a mineral oil.
Yeah. This has got to scare the hell out of hardware vendors like HP and Dell, though, because
a couple of the companies I've seen were doing it to Dell servers. So they buy a Dell, rip off the they take out the fans and take the heatsink off the processor, and apply a different version. Basically, they had to take out the fans because the fans can't run in the oil. But they were using stock Dell servers. Part of that, I think, has to do with the support contract, but also just it provides that name brand when you're trying to sell people your idea of dunking servers in oil.
Right.
If they're the same servers they were going to buy anyway, they're going to be a little bit more for it than if it's custom hardware.
I wonder if in a year, Intel says that they think that this is so great it could become like the norm for high performance cooling requirements. I wonder if you'll see like HP and Dell respond with servers on trays that are designed to slide into some sort of standardized oil containing rack that,
Yeah. Basically, for that type of setup, you'd end up with what the regular racks are now, except for they'd be laying down on the back instead of, and you drop the servers in vertically.
Yeah, vertically,
Although some of the oil ones I've seen, it's kind of at an angle, a shallow angle, rather than being 100% vertical. But the issue there is storage space. Like, you can't fit as much equipment if your machines are spread out horizontally. Horizontally instead of vertically. Right? Because when you're holding giant tanks of oil, you can't just have them up in the air.
True enough. All right, the next story,
it does raise some questions about hot swapping and so on, right? A lot of these machines, like, they don't really like it. Basically, you pull the machine, when you put them on rails in a rack, and you can pull it out, and you can work on the machine a little bit. But if you keep the top off for more than about 15 minutes, some of them will overheat because the airflow doesn't go right.
Yeah.
The Supermicros I have a plastic tray. So after you take the case off, there's a plastic tray over the CPU and stuff so that you can work on the other part of the machine for a little bit longer before it starts overheating.
Yep.
But if the thing has no fans and it's all passively cooled by being submerged,
it'll overheat. If you pull it out,
if you pull it out, then you basically have like minutes or less before you're overheating and possibly damaging it. Also, it does raise some questions about hard drives. Some hard drives have that semi-permeable layer and wouldn't take kindly to being flooded with oil. Now, if you're using SSDs, not an issue.
Right. All right, Alan. Now, this next story on the roundup. When I thought of when we found out that Stuxnet and Flame came from the U.S., I thought, oh man, that sucks that the U.S. sort of set the first real big cyber warfare precedents. We really. But what it also has done apparently is it's sort of forced two potential powers together that might not have. Who knows?
They were already together quite a bit before, but they're a little more specific now.
Now they're working together.
So the Islamic Republic of Iran and the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, which is North Korea, not South Korea, signed a number of new cooperation agreements with science and technology and so on, but they also appear to be collaborating in an attempt to defend themselves against the current cyber warfare campaign being conducted against them.
Yeah, I guess that makes sense. They're both sort of have the same interests. They both have they both have targets on their backs right now in terms of cyber warfare. So it makes sense they'd work together. All right, Alan, we talked about how Mitt Romney's taxes were being extorted with bitcoins, ransom, if you will. However, not everything is hunky-dory in Bitcoin land. It seems like every now and then we just, at least once a month, there's some sort of big Bitcoin breach story or something like that. And we got another one this week. Bitcoin exchange Bitfloor, right? They shut down.
Yes, after they were hacked and all the money that was in people's accounts on the site was taken.
I laugh
by
because
now
this
people would
happened to
learn
me,
to
right?
stop leaving their money in other people's hands.
I learned my lesson.
You know, especially, you know, some of these sites had, you know, the one had a hard drive crash and had no backups, so all the money was literally just lost. It wasn't even stolen; it was just lost forever. And you know, we've seen this a number of times with places getting hacked or whatever. It's
some call it the fifth biggest heist yet. Yes,
but basically, from what I read, they managed to get an unencrypted backup of the wallet from this site and, you know, steal all the money.
There you go. Wow, craziness.
But basically, don't trust random websites with your money.
Yeah. Keep your Bitcoins on your own hard drive and backed up.
Yep.
24,000 Bitcoins stolen. Whoa. Yikes. Yeah. That's some people had a bad day with that one. Yeah. Alan, I think we came to the end of this week's episode.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah? Now, we should mention, of course, that you can join us live on Thursdays at 1 p.m. Pacific, which is
4 p.m. Eastern or 2000 UTC.
There you go. And I'll do a file server update, I think, next week, because I'd mentioned, is there anything you wanted to mention before we run?
Not really. I built my nice machine. I can maybe get some better pictures of it or something.
Yeah, I'm still doing the transfer. I don't have like all my shares set up yet. I don't have.
Yeah, I haven't set up most of my stuff yet either.
I was talking on the live stream before we were recording that I was having some overheating issues, but I'll save that story for next week because I think that'll be a good all-inclusive story. So,
because I can talk a little bit about how I forced my ZFS array to use 4 kilobyte sectors, even though the hard drives still report only the 512K sectors or 512 byte sectors.
You're like, no, you will use 4K.
Yes, you will do what I say.
Very nice. All right, Alan, thanks for a great show. And thank you, everyone, for tuning into this week's episode of TechSNAP. And we'll be right back here next week.